with Kansas City Southern. CP and Kansas City getting together was actually a great idea. There was no duplicate trackage. They shared one terminal, which was in Kansas City. So that would get all, that would connect Canada and Mexico together going through the United States, and all the customers in between would benefit from that. But now Canadian National couldn't bear to lose that market share. So now it's a bidder also. So we'll see how that goes. There'd be no way to predict how that's gonna play out, because that'll be between the shareholders and boards of directors. So stay tuned for that. And if that may trigger some more mergers after that, so we'll see. And as most of you know, Genesee, Wyoming is going to be operating the piece of Pan Am Railways that CSX bought. That's a partnership with Norfolk Southern. So New England is going to have a whole different face once that sale is executed. So. And whenever.
Okay, I think there are a couple. David Monteverdi says the DL&W 959 is out and running on home rails, is mechanically and fully FRA compliant.
Yes, it is. It's been mostly a trailing unit, but it's been working. So terrific work with the DL shop guys getting that engine working. It's still in its faded Conrail blue, but once it's shaken down in service, it'll get painted this summer. So thank you, David.
We also had a question from Dave Simpson about the newsletter. So just to repeat about the newsletter, the Iron Hills Express, it is a members only newsletter that will be distributed via email. It will include news items of local interests, railroad related events, upcoming events that are happening with Tri-State, and also reporting on goings on in the group with equipment and other things we're up to. So all dues paying members are entitled to receive the newsletter monthly. And if you're not already a member, please consider joining at tristaterail.org/join. Okay. NW 611 is supposedly leaving North Carolina on Monday to head to the Strasburg for the summer, according to Ed Fielding.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. That's true. Yeah, look for a fun summer with 611 on Strasburg. It was very successful when they did it before, and they're going to do it again.
Mike, question from Barry Levitt. Any news on the caboose trip in Rockaway?
The caboose trips in Rockaway will be completely different when and if they operate again. I've been meaning to call the Chesapeake and Delaware to see what we can work out. But the corporate policy with the Black River and Western family of railroads is they will no longer permit riders in cabooses. So the next step is to would have to run the train with passenger cars. The fella, one of the casualties in this past year is the fellow who owned the Potbelly's restaurant, who sort of organized that whole Rockaway Days thing. He was a big part of the committee, and he was the one that found sponsors to pay to have the railroad operate trains there. He is no longer in business. The building is closed. There's either a restaurant or an Indian restaurant or a ice cream shop is going to go into that space. So that space is critical to making that work. So we don't know what's going to happen in September with the trips out of Rockaway. They will not be with cabooses if we run them at all. We were working with Rob Groh. He was the guy who owned it. We were working with him on doing a dinner train possibly on Friday and then run passengers on Sunday. But we'll see if we can do that with the new restaurant. Maybe we'll find some outside caterer. We have to talk to Chesapeake and Delaware, see what they will allow. So it is on our radar, and we will try to make something happen if we're indeed allowed to run by then, which we should be. So thank you, Barry.
All right, one more question, then we'll introduce Dan, and Dan will turn over to you. So just one last question from Paul Payton. Any opportunities for running excursions on NJT or on the Black River and Western operation out of Dover?
Yes, we NJ Transit, they had a formal announcement that they are fully staffed, that they have a full roster of locomotive engineers for the first time. So that's good news for us, because that means we should be able to run Santa trains. And we are looking at putting together a farewell to the GP40 excursion over NJ Transit. We've pitched a few different operating scenarios. We're seeing how that goes, but there's no retirement date for the GP40s currently. They are going to keep some of them around. I believe the total number is going to be 10. There will be work train engines. There will be a couple of them equipped. The PTC ones will stay around. I think the 42, I think the 4100, the 02, the 01 and the 09 will remain of those. And then a couple of the 4200s will remain. The F40s will be retired. So they're talking 2022, 2023. So we would like to do a farewell to the GP40, just like we did with the farewell to the MUs. And we helped put together the farewell to the U34CH. So those are in the works. And other than that, straight excursions on NJ Transit are tough because, you know, it's hard to make extra stops. And if it's on a line with weekend service, then you really can't stop anywhere. And if you can buy a commuter ticket and ride it, you know, there's not much we can do special. But a farewell to GP40s, we put a couple of back-to-back one train and on one train in the 41 back the other end, and we can stop a few places. We'll make that work. So, but yes, we are looking at NJ Transit operations, and that's what we had in mind.
Okay, it looks like we're ready to turn over to Dan. So Mike, you want to introduce our presenter, Dan McFadden?
Yes, Dan McFadden, longtime friend of Tri-State, longtime rail fan in this area. He's to us before, and his shows are outstanding, and he's got a great knowledge and a great handle on the context of everything that went on, in addition to just the pictures we're seeing. So Dan, thank you very much for putting this together, and we're looking forward. So everybody, this is Dan McFadden.
Dan, the floor is yours.
You can hear me?
Yep.
We hear you.
Well, it's a pleasure to present a program on my favorite railroad. My wife just stopped by and asked me if I was nervous. And what I said was, no, I'm not nervous, but I do think I had picked out too much material. So let's give it a shot. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through some early shots that were taken in the Brownie camera era, move on to the days when I had a better camera. And then there's going to be a short segment on something that I've never seen much written about or anything written about. And that is the Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve specials that the railroads ran back in the 60s. Hoboken was quite the place on those days, and I put together a little program on that. And we're going to try some movies, okay, some world premiere of stuff that hasn't been seen, that was taken 60 years ago. So let's give this a shot. Okay, I am going to, just give me a second here. Select all. Now, does that show okay?
I don't see that you're sharing your screen.
Oh, I had to share my screen. Okay, give me a second here.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Okay, share my screen. Got it. Okay. Let's try it again. Now, how do I get rid of this? Okay, 1 second here. Okay. So most of, are you doing, do we have it okay?
I don't see that we have the screen, your screen shared.
I did share the screen. Let's try it again. Okay, share screen. Now what? Now I have to click on anything else after share screen?
Did you toggle the share audio as well?
Um,
And just make sure you're selecting the correct screen.
So I'm trying to see where my, so I have like a dozen screens up here in a box. Which one am I supposed to pick? Desktop one or?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, the desktop.
Now, do you get anything?
There we go. Now we have it.
Okay, let's do this again. Sorry, folks.
Not a problem.
Okay. So first of all, most of what you're going to see here comes from my camera, but I do have some other people to thank who have long passed on to another world. So Ralph Curcio was a fellow that I introduced to the Erie Lackawanna late in the game, and he took some very nice pictures. He was a traction fanatic, as I was and still am. Robert Duthie was a schoolboy friend who lived next door to me in Brooklyn, and he shared my enthusiasm for the Lackawanna and later the Erie Lackawanna. We took a number of fan trips together. George McLean was a character that hung out in the Denville Tower a lot. And when he passed away, his wife gave me 2 of his scrapbooks, and some of the pictures in there, even though they're just 4x4 prints, they show some interesting material. So this is not a joke. You see the postmark on this piece of mail, 1951, and you see that it came from the office of the president of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. There it's addressed to me. So the story of this picture is that I don't have the letter that I sent him, but I have the letter that he sent back. And if you look down at the bottom, you see it's signed by William White. And he says to me, I have your letter. And I had sent him a letter saying I was very displeased by them phasing out the steam locomotives. And so he very gently explained to an 8-year-old that this was the price of progress. He also gave me a little life lesson down below. He says, there must be progress always. Nothing can stand still, because to do so is to go backward. If we stand still, the parade passes us by. So anyway, my interest in the Lackawanna goes way back. And he also enclosed a little booklet that many of you probably have in your collectibles, showing the power of the Lackawanna, the old and the new. So I first started to go to Denville. I rode my bike there around 1958, and I also took my first fan trip the next year when I was in high school. I had happened to pick up an issue of Trains magazine, and there was a little ad in there for a trip run by the railroad enthusiasts to Branchville. And it turned out, although I didn't know it at the time, it turned out that this was a regularly scheduled train. It was a Sunday Branchville train, and they ran it as a fan trip. The only difference was, instead of the open window Booten cars, they had the 200 series coaches with air conditioning, which, you know, it didn't matter to me. It was all new to me. I didn't know where Branchville was. Everything was brand new. So here we see there were no photo stops, but when we got to the stop where they pick up the milk cars, everybody got out and we saw the trains, you know, they shuffled the cars around, picked up the milk cars, and they did the usual backup move into Branchville. And at Branchville, they had a 2-hour layover. And you see my friend Robert Duthie. This is our first fan trip. You see him on the left over here on the extreme left. So the train ran with about 6 or 7 of the 200 series coaches, which were largely used on the secondary Lackawanna trains. Let's say, for example, a train to Scranton, that something of that nature. Sometimes passenger extras. And simultaneously around that time, I started to ride my bike to Denville. My friend Bobby Duthie, he had a camera which I think was a Minox. I'm not too sure about the brand, but it might have been a Minox. It took half frame, 35 millimeter, and so you're going to see a number of his pictures. They didn't fare too well. They took a lot of cleaning. Some of them need a lot more work. They weren't treated very well. But they do show the Lackawanna Railroad in 1959 or 1960. So they are of some value for sure. So usually we stood side by side taking our pictures. And here was the picture Bob took it of the Phoebe Snow at Denville. And a split second before that, I took my picture. Same picture, really the same thing, one color, one black and white. And Bob took the going away picture of the Phoebe Snow, a beautiful train. This is a picture of the Lakeland Express at Denville, and there's something interesting about this picture. And I used to think it was unusual, but as I look at all my pictures, it wasn't that unusual at all. If you look closely, you'll see that the second unit on this train is a freight F3. And in the summertime, it was not uncommon to see a freight unit on a passenger train. If you didn't need the steam heat, a freight engine was perfectly good. And you'll see some more examples as we go along. This was almost, if the Boonton line had a premier train, this was the one. It was first stop Boonton, and it carried the Mountain Lake subscription car. It was a good sized train, 10 cars or so, 9 or 10 cars. It went up to Netcong, stopped at Netcong, made the connection with the Branchville train, and then on to Washington. Here's another, this is probably a Sunday local, and you can see my friend on the side. I probably told him to get out of the picture. This is another Robert Duthie, and I could tell by the angle of the sun, this is the Phoebe Snow coming east. Train number 6. And this particular night, it had the office car, I guess, office car 99, which was a bummer for if you were riding the Tavern Lounge, because then your view at the rear of the Tavern Lounge was missing. I put this postcard view in because to me, it sort of plays into the next picture I have. I have a feeling that this postcard view was taken when the electrification was just completed. Take a look at the small bushes on the right-hand side, just alongside the platform. 30 years later, here's what those bushes look like. I think the railroad had given up on any kind of landscaping work, but a lot of that work still survived. So this is the 1959 shot that Bob took. An FT unit rolling through Denville. And this is the shot I took. If you see black and white, it's probably mine. This is a shot of Denville with my favorite of all the Lackawanna engines, the Trainmasters. So this was a morning train, generally HB9. You could count on it 7 days a week. And it generally came up sometime between, well, this was kind of early. I normally would have expected it around 10 in the morning. So this is, yeah, it was sort of running, you know, Boonton line had already been single tracked in areas, and it's sort of working against the traffic flow there for the morning rush. This was the last train down in the morning on the Boonton line. Even then, Boonton line had very skimpy service. This train actually started out at Denville. It came up as an extra from Hoboken, ran express all the way, and then backed around the Y, turned the train around, and went down as the last train of the day. Train 1026. The Denville Tower is a look then, and on the right-hand side, you see a mulberry tree, and the mulberry tree will be shown again later. This kind of made it very quaint there, this mulberry tree. There were kind of times when kids climbed it and fell out of it. Things always seem to be happening with the mulberry tree. One rainy day in November, I don't know why I happened to go up on a rainy day, but I went up on a rainy day with my camera, and the only purpose I can see of this machine was to burn off the weeds. And why they were doing that in November, I don't know. What other cause would this? What else would this be about? I don't know. And the boot and drill came by. I can just barely make out the number, 909, and typically the majority of the work would be Drew Chemical, which was located where the present day Walmart is. There's a work train. I think this is a work train, a maintenance away train. It sort of doesn't look like a typical drill to me. So this is at Dover. This day I was taking a trip to Scranton and back, my first time on the Phoebe Snow, and I was waiting for that to arrive. And while I was waiting for that, HB9 came through again. This time, if you look at the last two units, they're FTs. Although at the time I wasn't cognizant what an FT was. It was just an F unit to me back then. I told you about the last train going down the Boonton line, and this was a scheduled extra that ran every day, X 105, and it ran express with no passengers, just a deadhead move from Hoboken up to Denville, and then covered that last run down from Boonton. There were a couple of scheduled extras. I always think of as an extra as something that's not usual, but on the Lackawanna, they were usual. So this is an afternoon extra called X64. And what X64 was also related to the Boonton line. The first train up in the afternoon would go to Dover. He would back down to Denville, go around the Y, and then come down to Marston, Essex. And when he got down to the Oranges, he would pick up the milk cars. Another interesting thing about this picture is if you look at the last car, if you look at the front of it, look up top, you'll see a little stack there. This was the stove coach. The stove coach had a pot-bellied stove in it, so that if they were making a move without passengers, they could shut off the steam boiler and just keep warm with the pot-bellied stove. And I actually went into the car one time in Hoboken, and the stove was still, cherry red. There was nobody around, but the stove was still very hot. Take a look at the architectural detail. Behind the train, you see a little architectural detail there, right? So I tried to reproduce this photo 50 years later. And here's what it looked like 50 years later. Same place, same position, very different train. So here's the Phoebe Snow as it looked in Lackawanna days. The Jeep is probably not because they need power. It's probably there because they have to get it to Scranton for servicing. Typically, this would have been one of the passenger Jeeps, 966, 67, something like that. And periodically you would see this, and I'm quite sure it was just a matter of getting the engine serviced in Scranton. Convent used to be a very different place than it is now. Very quiet, nothing else around. There was just a small post office there. Just a very quiet place. And you'll notice there's no fence between the tracks. Passenger safety depended on common sense. When people got off the train on the westbound, they would just wait for the train to go and just cross the tracks. Here's another train at Convent, a 2-car local on a Sunday. This is the Phoebe Snow. It's just coming past Essling Lake, coming into Denville. I'm a little. I think these first 3 cars are milk cars, and I'm trying to match this up with other photos, and I don't see it carrying those cars on other runs. So I'm not too sure what this is about, but I sort of think these are milk cars. This is an MU. It looks like a very typical MU, but I had it marked on the picture that this is an RPO run. The trailer car there is an RPO car. So when there was RPO, it would make longer stops at the stations. Mail trucks would meet it, put mail on if it was going east, take mail off if it was going west. If you look at the old schedules, if you see an all stops local that takes about 10 or 12 minutes longer than usual, that would be an RPO run. And typically they had 2 or 3 each day, each way. And that service lasted, the RPO mail lasted until 1964. My first day in the Delaware Water Gap, this is train 47 in the Water Gap on July 4th, 1960. And then we went on to Cresco, another first time I'd ever been to Cresco. This is train number 2, the Pocono Express, making its station stop. Here's the Phoebe Snow making its station stop at Cresco. That's on a nice grade, so it made for a nice sound leaving that station, heading west and going away. Another day I stopped by the Washington station, and on weekends, the Lakeland Express would lay over there. And on the left, you see the Mountain Lake subscription car. Later on, we're going to see a movie that shows this in color. So if you can hang on for that. The day of the LNHR 100th anniversary, the Centennial Day, when they ran the 2124, I made a stop at Port Morris. And here was the lineup of power at Port Morris at all the different builders, a GM, 2 Alcos, a Fairbanks, and way in the back there, you can see some F units. And there was an RS3 on the table. It looked like they had been having some trouble with it. And here's an RS1 from the second order of RS1s, and you see the different lettering on it. This is a slide that I inherited from Ralph Curcio. He bought this thing on eBay, and I think I have the original. I'm not sure, but this shows an FT powered freight coming through the gap only a few days before the merger. So this is mid-October, well, early October 1960. Before the merger, in the summer of that merger, the eastbound main between Morristown and Madison got a lot of attention. They were they had single tracked the railroad after the morning rush hour to do all this work. So here's a picture of the Tampa in Madison. I'm on the viaduct there. Ahead, you can see the footbridge in Madison. Here's another day. You see train number 2 wrong railing it coming east because of the ongoing work. And here's number 2 again at Convent Station. This is the Friday before the merger. The merger was on the October 17th. This is on the Friday before. And you see the track gang is out there. The train has 2 heavyweight coaches that are, I would imagine, are deadheading someplace. And I was commuting it, believe it or not, I was commuting at that time because I had a summer job at Drew University repairing books. And we only had 1 car in the family. And I would get on at Morris Plains and go to Madison. And one day this notice was on the seat. And this was the beginning of the state involvement in supporting the commuter rail operations. If you read the details here, the state was putting up $6 million and Lackawanna was getting 1.7 of it. And the railroad had agreed not to do any more train off petitions for the duration of the thing. But a railroad that was close to going bankrupt really couldn't support a money losing commuter service. That should have been obvious to everybody. So one puzzling thing for a young person back in that day was you hear the railroads going bankrupt, but you go to the station and you see loads of trains. So I want to give it a little example of what I did see. This is the July 4th weekend. So July 4th, I'm just going to point out a few things here. First of all, a very cool thing about this is you see that in the first line, we see the Phoebe Snow. It has an E8 with a B unit in between and another E8. Then we see a westbound passenger extra with 2 E8s. And on the 4th line, we see the Twilight going west. It also has 2 E8s. So in the period of just 8 minutes, I saw 6 of the 11 E8s go by Denville Station. So the second line shows a passenger extra, and you'll see that passenger extra is carrying some foreign coaches. In this case, it had a Wabash, a B&O, and a Pennsy coach. That was not too unusual in those times to see foreign coaches being used at busy times. So this was running as a passenger extra ahead of the train number 5, the Twilight, we see on the 4th line. What else can I point out here? Down below, you see the one freight train we saw going east. BH8 had an NEBA with 47 cars. And to continue with that day, we third line from the bottom, we see a westbound freight HB3. Up top, we have the milk train, ton 42. That was the regular train that went to Branchville, a commuter operation. When it got to Branchville, it came back basically dead. You could say deadhead as train 1042, and it picked up the milk cars, the loaded milk cars, and went down the old road and left them in the oranges. And of course, I had to go back July 4th because that was also going to be a busy day. Well, a peculiarity of the railroad is some days they ran extra trains as a pure extra. There was went on the sheets as a PX. Other times it went down as an advance number 6. So you see over here we have an advanced Phoebe Snow number 6, and it's powered by 3 F units. And then right behind it we have the real Phoebe Snow. We have the second section of Phoebe Snow, so to speak. So the 2 sections of Phoebe Snow. Also notice here, this is a midway down, we see BH8. That's running with 3 train masters that has 90 cars. 3 hours later, down the bottom line, we see a second section of BH8 in the classic ABBA configuration. Just by happenstance, it also had 90 cars. So the railroad was busy. They weren't making money, but they were busy. And there was. The other thing that I noticed was that the motive power, especially with regard to E8s, was very tightly scheduled. If I saw the E8s going east on the Phoebe Snow, for example, I would know what train they're going to come back on. So these are the combinations that you would always see. If I saw power going down on a morning train number 8, I would know that 3 hours later, I would be seeing the same power come back on the Phoebe Snow. And the turnaround time, considering what they had to do, was minimal. The trains going east had to be really on time for this to work, and generally they were. So when you think about what they had to do for a turnaround, first of all, they had to stop in the station, give people a chance to get off. They had to uncouple. A switcher had to come along and pull the train back. The engine had to go out to the terminal to be serviced and refueled. And they did all that in a period of 2 hours or less. I always thought that was pretty impressive. And it almost always worked. So now we're into the EL era, and I'm still have my Kodak Brownie camera. And this was the first train that I went down to see, and I was expecting a nightmare, but things looked exactly the same. Nothing had changed. So this is the afternoon train to Buffalo, the late afternoon train number 5 to Buffalo, and it looked perfectly normal, nothing different. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, I went with my friend Bob Duthie to Hoboken. We had in mind a trip to Croxton Yard, which you'll see what we had in mind. This is the Morristown Parlor car. The Morristown Parlor car was a little different than all the others. When it got to Morristown, it did not stay in the yard. The Dover cars stayed in the yard. The Gladstone car stayed in the yard. But the Morristown car, for whatever reason, maybe vandalism in the yard, for whatever reason, that car would come back on a local and spend the evening in Hoboken. It only went to Morristown just to come back on another train. And it went up on the first Morristown train in the morning. This was the first renumbered tower I saw. This is the old 803A. I'm sitting by the MU shed. The same day, they didn't do it all at once because this is an RS3 coming off the Booton line to West End, and that's the original number 902. But it generally happened pretty quickly for all the units, but not all on one day, obviously. But within 3 or 4 weeks, they had started the renumbering. So here we are in Croxton Yard. I guess this is a tender of an old Berkshire. I'm not sure why they kept this around. And there were a bunch of switches running around. It strikes me also, what would happen today if a couple of teenagers were walking around Croxton Yard? I don't think it would go too well. Here's a guy working the hump. And here's what we came for. We came to see the O&W FT units. There were 3 sets of ABBA FTs in the yard, and the O&W, or what was left, it was hoping to sell them. That never happened, and they eventually went for scrap. But so this is my O&W experience. And these units sat there, they must have sat there for 5 years. This is a Gladstone train. We're at Bernardsville. And one thing I noticed about this picture, and I can't explain it, is it looks like they would, if you look at the left here, it looks like they were doing some kind of package express. It sort of looks very connected to the railroad, but I don't know any details about that. This is also at Gladstone, and you'll notice we have Black River and Western cars. Well, it turns out that they were shooting a movie, and the P&D drill, the Gladstone drill, picked these cars up from Chester Junction and took them all the way out to Gladstone. And over here, you can see by the old freight house there, they're set up to do their shooting. The movie, I think, was from the Terrace, and I'm pretty sure Paul Newman was in it. It was not a minor league movie. On this particular day, I was headed up to Chester Junction. I had found out about Chester Junction, Lake Junction and all that, and I was headed up there. I took a pic. This is train 47, which is primarily a mail train. It did have a coach to take you to Scranton if you wanted to go that way, but generally people would wait for the Phoebe Snow. And here we are in the summer of 1961, and you can see one of the RS3s has been repainted. This picture is not a very high quality, but it shows something interesting. It shows two sets of ABBA F units. The first set is FTs. On weekends, a lot of power had gravitated to the eastern end of the railroad. There was more traffic going east than going west. So on a weekend, they had a power imbalance and they had to get power back. And every weekend, it seemed like they would pick out a different way of doing it. On this particular day, they seem to have set a second set of F units just to be on the freight train to get them back that way. There were other times when they ran 12 units light on a Sunday afternoon. And still other times they ran what they call a PDX, a per diem extra. And that would have, all the empty cars that they wanted to get back to the home roads and save on the per diem charges. This is the Phoebe Snow at Chester Junction. This is 1964. And this was a very typical lash-up, two E8s, and an Alco. Big train with train masters sitting waiting for another train to go by on the main line. I found this engine at Portland, and it either had been just come back from being serviced or was going to be serviced. It was sitting there dead. Normally, these engines would have overnighted would have stayed at Bangor. So this was either coming back from being serviced or I'm pretty sure are going to be serviced. Port Morris, the steam crane, all steamed up and ready for something bad to happen. A small drill in Madison. Daytime drill. Nice wooden caboose. And this was the last day of RPO service. This was sometime in June 1964. You can see they still had a mail hook in Morristown. I actually saw this used when I was riding my bike. This is the Phoebe. No, this is the Twilight going by, and there's no. That probably the mail hook is out of service at this point, right by the old express office. And here's right after the Twilight came the Phoebe Snow through Morristown. And now we took another trip to West End. A set of FTs coming off the Booton line. Here's a set of train masters coming off the Booton line, 2 different days. And here's a switch engine on the Y at West End. Interesting is sometimes if I rode a train in, the Phoebe Snow had to be turned, of course. The observation had to be turned. And one time at least, I don't know if it was general practice, one time what I saw them do was just drag the train out through the tunnel to West End and turn the whole train on the Y. I don't know if that's what they always did, but I guess it was an easy way to get the whole train turned. You had to do something to get the tavern lounge car turned. This is a few pictures of the best fan trip I was ever on. This was an amazing fan trip run by the railroad enthusiasts. This trip covered 300 miles. Started out of Hoboken, went to Maybrook. From Maybrook, it went to Port Morris over the LNHR. From Port Morris, it went to East Stroudsburg by the old road. It was probably the last passenger train on the old road. And then from East Stroudsburg, it came back to Hoboken on the cutoff with many photo stops. So here we are stopped at Port Morris, and the inspection car, I'm not too sure if it was there by happenstance, but there it was. At Port Morris, they had come down up the Sussex Branch. So to go back over the old road, the engines had to run around the train. And here we are at Monunkeechunk. The train actually made a photo stop at Monunkeechunk, which was kind of amazing because there was really no room for people to spread out. We're basically against a wall of rock here. So the train backed into the tunnel, and then slowly crept out so people could get their photos. I was taking movies of, this is a Robert Duffy photo. I was taking movies of this. And it's, when we got to Stroudsburg, the train had to run, the engines had to run around. So Bob Duffy took his shot and I took my shot. You see that the theme of the trip was half Erie and half Lackawanna. So basically, because the engines had to run around several times, you had times when the Erie unit was in the front and other times when the new EL scheme was in the front. And while that was happening, the train, this is the, I think train 5 had become train 27. Train 27 came through. You can see all the rail fans up in the tower there. So this is a place where I hung out a lot. I can't tell you how many hours I hung out in Denville Tower. And really because it was a friendly towerman. He was happy to have company. And I guess he had seniority. He wasn't worried about somebody calling him out for having too much company. It was kind of a magical place. So here you see it. I took the previous shot and cropped it. You can, the lower portion here of the map is the Y. The track off to the right is heading off to Dover. The track off to the left is heading off to Boonton and Hoboken. And the track up top is the Morrison, Essex. So it was kind of magic to hear a train hit the bell and then creep across the board. It was a nice experience and I was there a lot. Rail fans were welcome. Jimmy Morris is sitting there in the with the headphones on. The guy in the back is George Mclean. He was a guy who was also, you know, he was there a lot. He was a constant visitor. He was a very interesting guy. He was much older than I was, so I wouldn't call him a close friend, but he grew up in Carbondale, worked the mines as a young man. He had lots of stories to tell. And here's Jimmy Morris talking to the dispatcher. And you see there's another young boy behind him there sitting on the table. So it was a welcoming place. And I have sounds to be recorded there. Maybe I'll just play a few of those later. Here's my mother getting on a Boonton Line train at Denville. And on Saturday mornings, they ran one train in on a Saturday morning and they took all the Jeeps back. They didn't take the A units back. They took all the Jeeps back. I guess to be serviced in Hoboken, I'm not sure. And you remember I mentioned before that it was not uncommon to see freight units on the summertime passenger trains. Here's another instance where a Boonton Line train is powered by a freight unit, in this case, an Erie Jeep, an ex-Erie Jeep. And here's a photo taken by Bob Duffy, the milk train coming down. And this is a picture taken from the tower of a freight train. This train, Denville had the tracker. They could reverse traffic on either of the two tracks between Denville and Dover. And this guy is traveling down the westbound Main from Dover. I don't think I ever saw it. I don't think I saw too many trains crossing over from one Main to the other. So this is a morning train, which is a little bit puzzling to me because the towerman we knew was an afternoon towerman, but somehow Bob got up there to take the shot. This is the 84, this is 1961. The 8414 is the old 801C. Okay, now we have a few pictures that came from George Mclean's scrapbook. These were just 4x4 prints, but they illustrate something. Here's another instance of a summer Boonton Line train powered by a freight unit. The RS3s were all freight. The Lackawanna did not have any passenger RS3s. And the MUs in their day, there was a lot going on. There was a lot of variety in the MU operations, much more than you would have expected from only seeing the last 10 years of operation. This was a train, an evening train late, that dropped off bundles of newspapers for the next morning. So you can see a bundle sitting over here on the left, and the news dealers would come along and pick up their bundle and they would have the morning newspaper. Similarly, they would all have another train that came along and dropped off the bundles for the afternoon newspaper, like the Newark News. So there was a lot going on with the MUs. You had the RPO service. Occasionally, you would see an express car tacked onto the rear of an MU. The boot and drill typically would take a car of express out of the boot and freight house, take it to Dover, and attach it to the back of the MU, and the MU would take it on into Hoboken. And sometimes if the boot and drill was late, they would do it right there at Denville. So here's the mulberry tree coming out. George Mclean lived close to the station. If something was happening there, he was very frequently on hand to capture it. If you look through the tree there, you see the Denville Freight House, and on the right, of course, you have the Denville Tower, which still stands. And this is something I never saw. Early on, the train masters were used quite a bit in commuter service. That had apparently ended by the time I got there. So I had never seen that. I decided to put this picture of George Mclean's out there. It was always puzzling to me why they would use them in passenger service anyway. Why would you take your most powerful units and use them on a passenger train? And eventually the railroad must have figured that out as well. This looks like an ordinary snow picture, but it's anything but. This was an epic snowstorm in January '61, and George Mclean, living close by, he didn't have to get his car out. He could just walk up to the station, and he walked up and got this picture of the Phoebe Snow, which was 3 hours late. I'm just telling you what was written on the back of his snapshot. And the amazing thing about this train was it had pushers. The Phoebe Snow had pushers. And not any pushers, these are FTs. You can see by the roof configuration that the Phoebe Snow had pushers. So they were going to get that train through come hell or high water. And that concludes that part. Now I'm going to give you all a break. And hold on a second. I finally invested in a good camera. So let's do this. Whoops, bad move. Sorry about that. And you know, I rehearsed this too, just not. Oh, let's do this. Okay. Select all. Here we go. Okay, this was roll number one, slide number one. Whoops, I don't want to go that fast. This was the first picture I took with my new camera. And the reason I got the new camera was they were running a trip with the 759 that went to Binghamton and back. It was an overnight trip. They went up to Erie and back in Lackawanna. And the best part about this whole thing was that on the following Tuesday, they ran the 759 back on a freight train. So here is a 759 pulling freight, a small freight train at Denville, Port Morris. They actually went around. They actually went into the yard at Port Morris, and I guess they watered the engine up and refueled it, put more coal on. Another shot at East Stroudsburg. And another shot crossing the Tunkhannock Viaduct. So we had a good day's chase. And I bought a good camera just in time to see Denville ripped apart. This is what happened when they single tracked the whole thing in 1971. It was kind of a sad day. I should have taken a lot of shots, but I could only bear to take the one. This is one of my favorite MU shots in Millington. This is the morning train just come off the High Bridge, Millington High Bridge. And this showed up in an EL calendar a couple of years ago. Many of my pictures in this era were going to work pictures. I was working in South Plainfield at the time. So I would make it a point to do things like this on my way to work. Bangor. This is supposed to be EL in New Jersey. I know that, but if I did EL in New Jersey, it would be all commuter trains, and I didn't want to do that. So here's the EL in Bangor. And we're back to, I'm just doing, these are just pictures, in good pictures that are just simply chronological order. An evening train in Murray Hill. This is the Morristown Club car, 3453. The train 508. It came on 508, and it always was the lead car. And it just come out of the paint shop. Going across Morris Avenue in Morristown. Here we have a freight in Ramsey. Here we are at Pond Eddy. I went to Pond Eddy any number of times. It was a very, very nice place to hang out. It's an early morning shot of a piggyback train. Nice bay window caboose. And I covered the New Jersey and New York, now known as the Pascack Valley, a couple of times. In particular, I went there because this is one of the last places for the E units. Yeah, I think the crux of the issue was that New Jersey wanted New York State to pick up some of the bill for running these trains, because this line crosses into New York State, and the Port Jervis line obviously does as well. And so these were the last lines to be converted to push-pull. MUs in Hoboken. This is another special event. The Delaware and Hudson was having a big anniversary, and they dressed up 21-2 as the D&H 302. So here it is in the yards in Hoboken. You see the World Trade Towers are still under construction. Back to Pond Eddy. It's funny, when the semaphores were going, I was chasing getting those. I could have just gone to Pond Eddy and gotten all I wanted. I show this picture of Convent for two reasons. Number one, I love the Convent station. I think it's a beautiful thing. But if I wanted to go and take a picture of it as it looks today, it's got loads of signage. Do this, don't do that, pay this amount of money for your parking. They've sort of ruined the looks of this beautiful station. So here are the Port Jervis trains. And if you look at these pictures, you can begin to imagine how busy Hoboken was when there were no push-pulls, when every train that came in had to make a reverse move, that switch engines were involved. The push-pulls saved a lot of work. So there's the first Port Jervis train pulling in. And the switcher pulls up to pull the train out. And meanwhile, the second Port Jervis train is pulling in with two Jeeps. So you see the second Port Jervis train is still pulling in, and the switch is still waiting to pull that train out, the first one. The engines come back to the servicing to the terminal. And finally, the E8s can move back to the service track. Here are the Stillwells at Mawa and a freight at Waldwick. So when the D&H was going to cease running under Sturrock Viaduct, I went with a friend, and we went up to Gulf Summit to capture what we could underneath the viaduct, underneath Sturrock. And we of course investigated the operations over the EL too. So here's a set of pushers. Here's another set of pushers. It must have been a busy day because there are two sets of pushers out. And this is a westbound. Sturrock is right behind me. Now, this is a broken rail joint, a rail joint. The amazing thing about this is that this crack is on top of Sturrock Viaduct. But I didn't hear about any terrible crashes, so it all worked out. Here's a picture. Here's the classic picture from on top of Sturrock. And then this came through, and then we knew we were done for. We sort of thought that this would be the last train of the day on the EL. I'm not too sure if he was coming from a wreck or going to a wreck. I never heard. And the going away shot. Took a little tour of the Bloom one day. This is up in Rupert. Denville Station at night. Notice the phone booths. People didn't have cell phones. So typically when a train pulled in, you would see somebody who needed a ride and they'd go to the phone booth and make a call home. Another way to get home, and this is not a good picture, unfortunately, is that there was a checker cab that met all the westbounds. And generally there was always somebody who needed a ride. And this lasted probably at least through the 70s. There was a day when not every family could afford 2 cars, and the checker cab was a solution. Another shot of the station. You can see the substation on the far left over here, or if you want to orient yourselves. And you can see somebody sitting on the far side. For whatever reason, the rail fans always sat on the far side on the Booton side. I guess they didn't want to mingle with the passengers as much. I don't know. But whenever we gathered, we were always sitting on the Booton side. Sunday train at Basking Ridge. The MUs are really, look at the MUs are showing their age. And I went on one of the classic O&W bus trips, and it explored the old O&W, and I stopped by it started out of Binghamton, and I saw this EL freight come through Binghamton. Tugboats. I wish I had taken more of those. In fact, I only took one picture, period. They were beautifully maintained. I think that had a lot to do with the crews. Common cars when they had to carry the EL logo. And almost every week there was proof that abandoning the Booton line was a really bad idea. Here's a train that broke down coming up the hill at Great Notch. Had to call the fire department. But they eventually got things going, and I'm not too sure if these pushers were on the train from the beginning or they took them off some other train or what, but anyway, pushers helped to get them out of there. Another event that happened in the days of the EL was a Ridgewood Centennial celebration, and they brought the 148 down to shuttle back and forth, and they were in any number of trips. Here he is backing down through Hohokus. I think this was probably the last use the Stillwell's ever had on the railroad. And they put on a good show, coming back up through Hohokus. It almost looked like old times. So we're getting near the end now, and I was out with my friend Ralph Curcio. This is a Ralph Curcio photo. And of all things, just near the end, the Lackawanna seemed very busy with freight. It seemed like they had taken all the freight and taken it off the Erie and put it back on the Lackawanna. And here's a freight, a very substantial freight at 106 cars. And within the hour, another train came along with 131, 4 units up front, 3 units pushing. And I'm sure the 3 units were there to get them over the hill at Great Notch. And this is a Ralph Curcio photo of a ferry in Hoboken. Another nice shot. So now we're into the Conrail age. And gotta have to make the best of it. The railroad's gone, you still gotta see what's out there. But every now and then something would happen that it looked like Conrail hadn't happened. And this was a particular day. There was a train called, I think it was called CS9. CS9 is here making a pickup in Dover and making some sort of move. And then when the train pulls out, he will have picked up this other Jeep, and there'll be 3 Jeeps going west on this particular train. I chased him up over to the cutoff. And here is a shot in the cutoff. Of course, you know, with freight, so little freight, it was pretty obvious that Conrail did not have any good intentions about the cutoff. So I tried to get up there on any number of occasions, and it was kind of a painful thing. You had to wait a long time to see a freight. And so we're at the Haynesburg Viaduct, and after waiting 4 or 5 hours, a train did come by. And here he is going out over the viaduct. The Freedom Train made a stop in Morris Plains. And here he is. I think this is by the Manor Arena. And after that, there was some servicing to be done. They took him down to the M&E shops. And believe it or not, I think they got this thing into the shop in Morristown. And you can see the Whippany River 148 in the background. So it's kind of an interesting day to get 2 live steam engines in Booton. And the Freedom Train went out one way, the engine went out another. Here he is. What happened was the engine went out with just a crew car, and they went up to Morris and Essex. They went up to Port Morris. They turned on the Y, and then they came back down the Booton line. So here he is at Morris Plains, and I'm pretty sure this is the last 484 that ever came through Morris Plains. The Centennial unit in Hoboken. You can see that they have a lot of deferred maintenance here. Take a look at the weeds. This is 1977, rather. A weekend local at Morris Plains, kind of an unchanged scene. This is Powder Mill Curve, which is between Morris Plains and Tabor. Actually, it's between Route 10 and Tabor. And even a year or so later, there was still engines that really hadn't, that looked as they had looked at under Erie Lackawanna. This is a year later at Denville. There was some big piece of equipment or some big piece of maintenance going on at the substation. You see a bunch of workers on the right-hand side. And I went back up on the cutoff one more time. And this is the day I saw my last train on the cutoff. And you have to wait a long time, so you have to find other things to take pictures of. And there were 2 freight cars in the siding. And apparently they had feed or something for the farmers because they were coming picking things up from the boxcars. Another shot. The towerman, Jimmy Morris, who was so friendly and allowed visitors, his first job in the railroad in the 1930s was a towerman at Greendale, an extra man at Greendale. And here's finally the train that came through. It had Penn Central Power or ex-Penn Central Power. And there was a bunch of kids hanging around, and I got this kid on the right-hand side to wave. I guess it would have been better if he was more toward the center of the picture, but anyway, try to get a little human interest into it. Greendale is quite the wreck. Ralph Curcio photo of the Millington High Bridge, the height of the fall color season. Another picture of tuxedo of the Centennial unit. Back to Pondetti one more time, kind of sad visit, Penn Central Power, single track, and a Conrail caboose. One thing I did do a good job on in getting pictures were the club cars. So I commuted for 35 years into New York, and to get the club cars, what I did was I took a long lunch hour and went back over to Hoboken and got in these cars and took quite a number of pictures. So that last picture was a 3451. There's no picture of the Centennial unit. So I did try for another shot on the cutoff, but this time I was out of luck. So I took this picture of Roseville Tunnel in lieu of a train. And it's interesting over here. You can see the snow fence on the left-hand side. Apparently, well, you can see it's pretty steep terrain here after they had made the cut. And I think I heard one time this was the only slide detector on the entire Lackawanna Railroad. And you can see where they had taken the one main track and shifted it over for added clearance in Roseville Tunnel after they single tracked it. Whoops. And now Conrail is really in full force here. This is maybe 2 or 3 years later. And some pictures at West End. These pictures are also mind-boggling to me because I was walking around at West End and I don't think you would do that today. It may have been something to do with the case that I was generally coming from work and had, believe it or not, had a suit and tie on when I was taking these pictures. So I would leave work early to do little adventures like this. And generally, when you're wearing a suit and tie, your work duds are a little more deferential to you. At least that was my experience. So now some pictures at Morristown. This is a Morristown train and he's got to cross over. And you see the guy on the phone there. I guess he's calling the dispatcher to get permission to cross over. And here he is snaking across. So he's going from the westbound main, crossing the eastbound main and going into the yard track. And you see the car here, the first full car on the right, center right is the club car. Even when it was all push-pull, Hoboken still seemed to have a switch engine assigned to it. And so here's a shot of that. And I remember I think this engineer's name was P.J. Murray. Very nice guy, very friendly. So I commuted for 35 years. The first 20 years we were on the CNJ, but occasionally to break it up, I would come over and commute on the Morrison Essex. So one day I'm going home. I think I was commuting out of Murray Hill, and the old MUs just couldn't make it up the hill. So here we are stalled on the hill between Short Hills and Summit. And so we waited, another MU came along, and with the added power from the other MU, we got up the hill. I'm not too sure what happened from there, but Sunday scene at Gladstone. It's interesting that one little, as I was scanning it, when you're scanning photos, you tend to notice things that you would never see. When you project them, you really haven't got time to look at them because you're afraid of burning them up. The low roof trailer cars had a headlight that was mounted above the roof, and the high roof trailer cars that you see on the second from the right had the headlights set into the roof, and I think the whole thing was keeping the headlights at a constant level. And for a while, the New Jersey Transit tried the Bud cars in the New Jersey and New York. I don't know how it worked out, but it didn't last long. Christmas card photo at Murray Hill. I think there's another shot of Gladstone. And the Bud cars wound up on a fan trip. I don't know, did the Jersey Central run this? I'm not too sure, but it was a reenactment. It was what could have been if the Lackawanna had RDC cars. This is 1960. And here he is stopped at the Netconk station. And you can, if anybody knew Bob Bars when he was a young guy, here he is as a conductor on that train. Another shot at Hoboken. I never understood why they did their trailer cars in orange and their power cars in red, but here's the real story. Paint or no paint, the MUs were in pretty bad shape. So once the trains had stopped running on the cutoff, I took a trip up to Haynesburg to take in the scene, and there were a couple of guys there with a speeder, and they were having fun running the speeder back and forth. And in fact, they gave me a ride to Blairstown on the speeder. So that was my last ride on the cutoff. And just for some interest, I found this, I just taking pictures of Gladstone one day, I found this piece of rail from 1895. So this piece of rail, I guess it's 85 years old at this point. I'm sure it's gone now, but. And now we're coming down to the last days of the MU operation. And I'm riding, I took this picture out the window at Summit. So I'm commuting. The last month or so of the MUs, I decided I was just gonna do what I could to take pictures of the MUs. Picture of Murray Hill taken from the old coal dock. This is an unusual picture because this car number 3455 is the number of a club car. And in fact, this is a club car converted to coach. The club cars were numbered after they were renumbered in 3000. They were renumbered. They were numbered 3451 to 55. So at some point, this car was converted to coach. And a very distinctive feature of it is the light that's over the door frame. That was not a feature of any of the trailer cars that I ever saw. That's for sure. And in the last week, they were doing testing, of course, of the new Silverliners. And during the week, they would do the testing on the weekend, and then they would run all the trains with push-pull equipment. The Silverliners during the week were stored on a third track in the meadows. And then the New Jersey Transit sort of rose to the occasion and had a celebration in Maplewood to recognizing the role of the old MUs. And they recognized the people, believe it or not, there were people who had ridden the first run of the MUs. One person I recognized in the center there is Homer Hill. And they're showing the tickets. They're showing the tickets they had from the first run, I guess, in 1931. That's pretty impressive. And one thing Lackawanna fans will always have, they'll always have these stations. Just a picture of Mountain Station, which I think, beautiful, beautiful staircases, beautiful everything. Tri-State also got into the act, running a special train the weekend before the end. Here's a 12-car special sitting at Gladstone. And one of the last mornings at Chatham, this particular morning, I got on the train at Chatham to ride. And coming home, I ran into a friendly engineer and I rode to Dover. This guy's, I think his name is Bill Hahn, Hann. And the crew, he's still living, he's in Dover. And I eventually made contact and sent him this picture. Train backing down into the yards in Dover. And sometimes when you wait for a train, you need to shoot something. And this is what I shot. So finally, it came to a last day, August 24th, 1984. All good things come to an end. The last train to Gladstone pulled out at 7:20. And the last train of them all pulled out to Dover at 7:30. So Tri-State got their name out there. And lots of people who were along for the ride. And as the trains left, all the horns sounded in Hoboken. Anybody was near a horn was sounding it. It sounds kind of cheesy, but when you hear it happening, it's kind of chilling. And here we are in Dover. So for a couple of days, they ran around just with the push-pull and pulling the old MUs with the GP40s. But on Tuesday, they cut over the Mars and Essex, and here's the first day of Silverliner service on the Mars and Essex, the Tuesday following the end of the old MUs. And here's the very first run on the Gladstone line. That was a little bit later. That happened on Labor Day. This is the first train. on Labor Day weekend, 1984. Here's the final slide. A very sad one. Denville Station Denville Station was deteriorating for years, and I heard it was gone. I went up there, and this was what was left. So that's the end of that little session. I have one more thing of pictures that I want to show, and this leads into what we're going to see in the movies. So let's do this. Select all. Okay. Now, early on when I started this, I said that one of the amazing days in train watching was New Year's Eve. How do I get this thing to stop? New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve. People got a half day off of work, and they ran passenger extra. They had a very elaborate schedule set up to account for this, people working half days. So somehow or other, I'm not too sure how I picked up this bulletin, but this is a 7-page bulletin that describes everything that's going to happen on New Year's Eve, Friday, December 29th. And this is just one page out of 7. And you can see they list conductors, brakemen, engineers. They show up top here, we see a 1 p.m. extra to Essex Fells, make all the stops. Then we see a 1:30 extra to Midvale, and even put the thing in the yard on track 2. They also showed the normal rush hour, some rush hour trains annulled. So when I caught wind of this, I went any number of times. I must have seen this thing 5 or 6 times, and I took my camera along on a few occasions. On a few occasions, I had my friend along, Bobby Duthie. And so here's a crop of what you just saw. But there's lots of stuff. Anybody wants a PDF of this whole thing, I'll be happy to send it to them. Very, very elaborate. So here's a New Year's Eve 1960. You see an MU pulling out with white flags. Here's Bobby Duthie's picture of it. It was a different train, but same idea. Switch it with no push-pulls around and all these commuter operations. Hoboken was really buzzing with switcher engines. There was lots of work to do, pulling trains out, putting equipment in. I've always said that the busiest time for Hoboken had to be the first couple of years of the Erie Lackawanna merger, or when the Erie moved in there, because they just had many more trains than they had ever handled before. That's for sure. Here's a switcher putting a string of Booten line coaches in on one of the tracks. Here's a Bobby Duthie shot. And you can see one of the extras pulling out. This is a scene you'd like to jump in. This is a beautiful scene with Erie E8s there. So now jumping over now, I'm sort of preparing you for the movies that are going to come up. They're going to show this in live action. Now we're on Christmas Eve, 1963. This is an Erie PA backing his train in. He came up from the Erie coach yard. He went around a new connection. And he backed his whole train in straight from the old Erie yards. Here we have 2 trains going out side by side. You'll see when we show the movie, you'll see both of these trains. I was shooting with my Brownie camera. Bob was shooting movies, and so you're going to see these 2 trains come out side by side. And this is a Booten line extra. The reason I know it's a Booten line extra is it's carrying the Mountain Lake subscription car. You're also going to see that in the movies. And in the middle of all this, they ran a freight train, 3 train masters with 70 cars. So if you give me a minute, we're gonna give the movies a shot. Come on. Okay. I haven't heard any objections, so we're going to try the movies. Okay. Duffy. Now, my friend Bobby Duffy was not the most organized person, and he at some point, what he did was he took all these reels and he spliced them together. So you get family celebrations, then some trains, then some more family celebrations, then some trains. And I've never taken the step of learning how to do video editing. So I'm going to play but I know where to look for these particular segments. So first, we're going to get to the Christmas Eve stuff in a little bit, but first we're going to see something else. Now, let me get this over here. Whoops. Let me stop this thing. Now, I have to go to spot 490. Is this showing up okay?
Yeah, it's showing up fine, Dan, if you just want
Okay.
to full screen it.
I will. I'll make it close to full screen. Does that work?
Perfect.
So what we have here is we're going to see a Taylor Extra. We're going to see a coal train come through Denville with FT units in 1959. Now, if you look at this thing, the camera is probably on a tripod, and probably this train is bouncing the tripod around. Because it always comes back to the same position. It's not like somebody's holding it. This is kind of Bobby Duffy had the idea that he was going to put his camera down in the middle of the track and get the Phoebe Snow going over, and he did. Unfortunately, he didn't angle the camera properly. So this just takes 30 seconds, but teenagers do some crazy things, and this is what Bobby Duffy thought was a good idea in 1959. And there it is. Here's a milk train coming down from Branchville. Here's the Twilight coming west, Buffalo train. This is all at Denville. He'll be going by Essling Lake in just a second or two here. An MU coming east by Essling Lake. And with fading light here, we have another MU. And the last train in this sequence is this freight coming east. Oh, West End. Maybe Snow. Train coming up the Booton line with FTs. And then he goes over to a different topic. So let's stop that. Okay, now we're going to try the other movie, and this one more. Now, so this is in fact Bob Duffy. He in his backyard in Brooklyn. So I have to go to start this 60 seconds in. Say okay. Now let's see what we see here. Car float. We're on the Hoboken ferry. Now I think he spliced these wrong. It takes the jump and sort of goes backwards, but so I'm just going to stop this, freeze this thing for a second. This is interesting, the Skyline. This is something that I'm sure I passed by it many times, but I didn't know it was of importance. This building you see right here, it's sort of if you move over from the left-hand side, you see a sort of a dome-like structure. That's the Singer Building. The Singer Building, for a short time, was the tallest building in the world, and of course, it was owned by the Singer Sewing Machine Company at the height of their fame. And this was but that building, shortly after this was, the reason it interested me is shortly after this was taken, that building was torn down. At the time, it was the tallest skyscraper ever to be taken down. And there's the Woolworth Building. The Woolworth Building was the tallest building in the world for about 12 years. Now we're seeing one of those, I'm not totally sure this is Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. I still have to do more research and compare it to the other shots I took. But you will see a New Year's Eve operation in a minute. Yeah, this is one of the Christmas Eve, that MU had flags on it, white flags. Stillwells did not look good with boot and line coaches. So it's easy to see all the movement that was necessary when you didn't have push-pulls. Strange lash up. Now let's stop this. Oh, Bobby's taking pictures of his model trains here. Let's, one more segment. And we're gonna jump to 405. So this is going to be Christmas Eve 1963, and this corresponds to the black and white shots you saw from me earlier. Here's the three train masters going out on the freight, or maybe at this point just switching. I don't know. So again, this is Christmas Eve 1963. Here are trains back. This is kind of a crazy sequence. Here are trains backing out of the Erie Yard. They're going to come up. They went along this line, which is out by Grove Street. I think Bob Barnes called it River South or something like that. So this is the line that's currently used by the portions of it by the new light rail line. Remember I mentioned we were going to see the 862. Here's the 862 backing his train in. There's a B&O coal train on that line. The passenger train is on the new connection they made when the Erie started to use Hoboken. C&J Hack. Okay, here come the extras. So this is a Booten line train. Pay attention to the last car. That's the highest numbered engine on the EL, 8454. There's the club car. Here come the two side-by-side Erie extras. Here's a deadhead, a PX coming east, white flags. Okay. And that takes care of the Bobby Duthie movies. I'm gonna, unless somebody objects, I'm gonna take another 15 minutes here. One more thing I want to do is I want to show, and I'm going to make these links available if people want to look at them. Oh, I do this a different way. 1 second here. Dropbox links. So I'm just going to play one or two of these sound recordings. One Christmas, my parents gave me a tape recorder, and of course that it quickly came to mind this would be a good thing to take to the Denville Tower. So I have 3 different sections on Dropbox that can be shared, and I have a description of what goes on. So for example, here is the Lake City's train number 5. It's an evening train going to go to Chicago, probably has some nickel plate sleepers. Now, I'm going to jump ahead here, but you can hear the bell. Whoops. Now, so this he's blowing for Tabor now, and he's going to blow for Lackawanna Avenue in the station itself. You're going to hear 2 extra beeps at the end of one of these sequences. He's saying hello to an engineer who was retired, who had a house nearby. Hear the plane overhead, old prop plane. Turn your speakers up. So it was always a nice sign when those trains came through, because running a train like that is very different than running a commuter train. You have people in a dining car. They keep the train stretched out and the units are notched up. Even if they're braking, they're keeping the units notched up. One more thing here, I have to do justice to the towermen that were there, that I listened to all the time. So one thing you could do when you were sitting in the tower, you had an open block line, and if another towerman was reporting trains, you'd be listening in to hear what he was reporting. He would call the dispatcher and take things off his sheet and report them. So this is just a 30-second clip. This is Jimmy Morris, and these are not special trains, just MUs, but you can hear what he did. This is only 30 seconds. So he announces Denville.
6:44 at 9:06 and 42 at 9:29. West on 1, 6:49 at 9:02, 10:33 at 9:38, 6:51 at 9:44.
The Dover towerman is a little more interesting. He's going to start up with train number 5. He also, the Dover towerman, because he has trains that are terminating and originating, he also reports, it does more reporting, reports the crews.
Number 5 at 8:55. 49 with a 2341 with 4 daughter weight and Cow Flash at 9-8. 1033 with a 952 with 2. Smith and Reese at 944. 651 with a 2221 with 4. Surface and Lawrence at 950.
It's going to stop it. There's 2 overlapping sounds here. You hear the pumps going. That's for the switches in the Denville complex. They were run pneumatically, and then you hear the voice of Walter. The Dover towerman was a guy by the name of Walter Hellriegel, and I heard him many times.
653 with a 2238 with 4. Kelly and Koski at 1046. Eastbound 644 with a 2515 with 4. Aaron Hopper and Amadale at 859. X110 with a 908 with 4. Carney and Sagan at 94. 1042 with a 913 with 7 at 922 and 23.
That's the milk train.
646 with a 2637 with 4. Surface and Cow Flash at 959. And delays. 629 for Hoboken and 3 papers.
Okay, we're going to wrap up within the next 10 minutes. One last crack at movies that I took, and I was taking these, you'll see why I took them. Let's see here. These are movies that were converted by John Pachulis, who does it, Pachulis Media. He does a great job. So this is Hoboken, 1982. One more and then we're done. 4 more minutes. Be patient. D3. So this next one was taken 1984 and it was probably the last significant snowstorm that the MUs went through. By the way, I did all these movies on the way to work. Follow car. Okay, I am done. I think I tried all your patience, but we got through it.
Thank you, Dan. That was a very impressive breadth of content, and
Yeah,
I
very,
think
very agree, Dan. That was excellent, especially the sound recordings. You never get to hear the sound now. Question, that train with the horns blowing at Denville. Do you remember what the leading engine was? Were those Erie horns we were hearing or Lackawanna horns?
Oh, I can tell you. Okay, you really want to know?
Well, it doesn't have.
I'm telling you, I want to tell you right now. Okay, because I have a PDF here with the description of what I saw.
Because the Lackawanna E8s had a different style of horn than the F units.
Right.
I don't know how that relates to what the Erie had.
But you know, they converted some of the E8 horns. It was it became very confusing. I don't think the Lackawanna horns survived in the E8s. So this was the lead unit was 811, an old Lackawanna unit.
Right.
The trailing unit was the 823, and there was a PA in there, 859. 811, 823, 859. It's amazing you don't even hear the PA.
Right. Well, we were probably listening to a Lackawanna horn then.
Yeah.
Leslie, I
Right.
forget the number
But
185 or something.
Yeah, but this is an Erie Lock, but that was not, that, I'm quite sure that was not the horn they had in Lackawanna days.
Yeah, okay. Still excellent, great context. We love the way you spin all this stuff together and show us the tendencies of what happened, like the power moves and what days they ran. That stuff is so interesting. And you don't see it on film much, so you really covered a great section at the right time.
One thing I think this presentation showed is, I mean, the movies I showed, you couldn't have shown, you couldn't do that in an auditorium. You can't project 8mm film and get a good picture in an auditorium.
Well, that's true too. There's just not enough light and the picture doesn't hold up. It's only 8mm across. And if you make it 30 feet wide, it all, it's not sharp,
So meetings of this type give it, there's lots of people who have taken movies and they're tucked away, and a lot of interesting stuff out there that hasn't been seen.
We have a number of questions and comments if you're up for some questions, Dan.
Sure.
Well, first off, your son, David McFadden, said he couldn't stay for it all, but he thought it was great.
He's at Gettysburg.
Yeah. John Barth had a number of comments. He said he was on the fan trip on June 4th, 1961.
Okay.
He said the train masters all had steam boilers except the last two, 860 and 861.
Right.
Someone asked, is your old buddy and fellow photographer Bob Duffy still living? What was his story? What did he end up doing with himself?
All three of those people passed on a long time ago.
Okay.
And
So
his daughter, basically, his daughter came to me and said, would you like his rail material? And I said, of course.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, the person said they very much appreciate his photography and videos. So Gary Kazin asks, why are the boxcars in the middle of the coal train?
Oh, I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay. Let's see what else here. Lots of praises for the presentation, Dan. Lots of excellence, wonderful stuff. Loved all of it. From all across the country. So we had about 130 people tune in.
Yeah.
In total.
To add a few more comments to what we saw, Dan questioned the passenger service on the train masters. They were purchased for passenger service. Fairbanks Morse, when they were designing them, suggested the Lackawanna to paint them in the freight paint scheme, believe it or not, for freight units. But the Lackawanna intentionally bought them for passenger service to help vanquish steam. And they were on commuter trains to Washington and Branchville for their first few years. And that's why they had the steam boilers.
Uh-huh.
You also mentioned that combine that had the chimney on it. The 409 had the chimney, and it was pretty much a mainstay on trains 44 and 47. They're the ones that carried loaded milk cars from New York State and then empties back. So the crew wouldn't have to connect the steam lines that had a coal stove in it. Other trainmen have told me Combine 415 also had a stove, but I've got many pictures of the 415. They're not showing a stove, but the 409 had it.
We had a question from Gregory Hamadas. He said, what year was that Hoboken shot with the steam engine and the World Trade Center under construction? I think that was the shot with the mock-up D&H engine.
Yeah.
That was D&H 302. That was a Reading T1.
Something like 1972.
Right. I was going to say 72. That's right around when they did that. Then the 759 trips came a little after that. Also, Dan, you mentioned the last 484 through Denville or Morris Plains. Tri-State helped run a trip with NJ Transit with Reading 2102 in the 1980s. So that would have been the last 484 there.
Well, you talking about, I was talking about Morris Plains. Do you think did it go through Morris Plains?
Yes, yes.
Wow.
The trip ran to Port Jervis, but it deadheaded up through Washington, Netcong, and down to Morrison, Essex. So it went deadheaded inbound and outbound.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also of note, while we're on our call here, Kansas City Southern announced that they're accepting Canadian National's offer. So Canadian
Yeah.
National will be taking over Kansas City Southern.
Right. I was going to mention that. We talked about it tonight in the news for good of the club. That's going to change the world because Canadian National's already an east to west, coast to coast railroad. Now they're north to south. So they've got the entire continent covered. So this may shake up the industry a little bit. You might look for a Union Pacific, Norfolk Southern, or someone else who can do the same thing, coast to coast and north and south. UP's already in Mexico, so stay tuned. And Canadian Pacific has 5 days to respond to up its offer. So we'll see. We'll see. So big time in the industry. Dan, that was terrific stuff. Terrific.
I was
Yeah,
happy
thank
to
you
do
so
it.
much, Dan. So we have a question from Edward Holder. He said, "Do you know my grandfather, Richard Forrest, Dick Forrest?"
Yes, we all know Dick Forrest.
Yeah.
We love him. And Dan knew him. He would come. Dick was a regular at our meetings.
Yep.
Yep. And Dick would
Okay.
ride those parlor cars, the club cars, when he did.
In those last couple of months, I tried to buy the rights to ride the parlor cars, and New Jersey Transit they only got back to me after the MUs had ended. But it was surprisingly cheap. It was not an expensive deal to ride those parlor cars.
Your that note you said that the Morristown one always deadheaded back to Hoboken. That's interesting. I didn't know that. We'll look into it. I'll ask some of the people who were around then operationally to see why that happened. It might have been just the way the schedules were to get the equipment back where it needed to be for another trip or something.
Are you talking about I talked about train X64, or that? Do you mean that?
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the equipment got back. Remember, the Booten line was largely a one-way operation in the morning and evening, right? So get the equipment to get the first train can get back to Hoboken. You can use that engine on another train. And furthermore, he was picking up the milk cars and the oranges, so the empties.
I don't know if you'd be able to answer this, Dan. Maybe Mike can. It says, "Does Metro North still have the Phoebe Snow observation car?"
Don't know.
Don't know. I don't know either. I think Mike had to step away for a second, but it looks like that's the last of the questions, Dan. So thank you very much for the show. We greatly appreciate it. We're gonna make this available on the website. It's all been recorded, so be happy to share that with you and everyone on the call.
And to answer the question, yes, the 2 tavern lounges are still on Metro North. They still take care of them and they still use them occasionally for special moves.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. The next meeting will be the second Thursday of June. We'll be hosting Kevin Olson for a presentation on the New York and Greenwood Lake Division of the Erie Railroad. So we're all looking forward to that. Thanks again, Dan. We greatly appreciate it. And good night, everybody.
Yep. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Good night.